It was August 16th, 1977. The king was dead. But what happened inside that marble-floored room at Memphis Funeral Home, in those silent hours before the world said goodbye, was something one man carried alone for nearly 5 decades. Tonight, at 79 years old, with his hands trembling and his eyes fixed on the middle distance, Robert J. Hamner finally speaks. He doesn't want money. He doesn't want fame. He says he just doesn't want to die with it. I've told my wife. I've told my priest. But I never told the world. And the world deserves to know. Robert Hamner had been working funeral preparation for 11 years when the phone rang at 3:42 in the afternoon on August 16th, 1977. He was eating a ham sandwich at his desk. He remembers that detail because he would never finish it. My supervisor, Doan Griggs, calls me in and says, "Bobby, we've got a situation. You are not to discuss this with anyone. Not your wife, not your mother, nobody. You understand me?" I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Good, because they're bringing in Elvis Presley." Hamner arrived at Memphis Funeral Home on the corner of Bellevue shortly after 5 p.m. 3 black cars were already parked outside. There were 2 men in dark suits he didn't recognize, not from the funeral home, not from the hospital. They stood near the service entrance with their arms at their sides and said nothing. I thought they were Colonel Parker's people, Hamner says. Later I heard one of them mention a name I recognized from the Presley organization. But by then, I'd already seen what I wasn't supposed to see. The body arrived wrapped in a white sheet on a standard transfer gurney. Hamner was one of 2 embalmers present. The other, a man he calls Danny, whose real name this publication has confirmed but withheld at his family's request, was visibly shaken. From the moment they entered the preparation room, Danny pulled me aside right away, Hamner recalls. He said, "Bobby, something is wrong here. Something is very wrong." I told him to calm down and do his job. I wish I hadn't. What Hamner observed in the first 30 minutes of the preparation process contradicted the official narrative in ways that were, he says, impossible to misinterpret. The condition of the body, the temperature, certain physiological markers, all of it suggested a timeline that did not align with what the Presley family's physician had stated publicly. Elvis had been dead for much longer than they were saying. Hamner says flatly, "I've prepared hundreds of bodies. You develop an instinct. What I was looking at was a man who had not died that afternoon. I don't know when he died, but it wasn't that Tuesday." He pressed no further that evening. The 2 suited men remained in the corridor the entire time. At one point, one of them opened the door and looked in without speaking. Hamner kept his eyes on his work, not by midnight. His job was done. He signed the paperwork that was placed in front of him, collected his things, and walked out into the August heat. He did not speak of what he had seen for 47 years. The first thing any embalmer does is conduct a full external assessment of the body. It is methodical, clinical, and documented. Hamner says that on the evening of August 16, 1977, that assessment produced findings that he was explicitly instructed not to record. There was a form we filled out, a prep sheet we called it. Condition of the remains, notes on any wounds or marks, observations relevant to the preparation process. I started filling mine out. One of those men came in, looked at what I'd written, and tore the sheet off the clipboard. Just tore it off, folded it, put it in his jacket pocket. Told me to start a new one. What had Hamner written that warranted this? He pauses before answering, choosing his words with the care of a man who has rehearsed this moment many times in his mind. There were marks on the inside of the left forearm, consistent with, and I'm not speculating here, I'm describing what I documented in my professional opinion, consistent with repeated injection sites. Not 1 or 2, many, over a long period of time. This alone was not remarkable. Elvis's drug use was an open secret in Memphis, and the official autopsy would eventually acknowledge the presence of multiple prescription substances in his system. What troubled Hamner was not the marks themselves, but their distribution and freshness. Some of those injection sites were very recent. I mean hours. Some were older, weeks maybe. But there was one area on the forearm, about 3 inches below the elbow, where the bruising pattern was unlike anything I'd seen from normal injections. It was blunt, pressurized, like something had been administered very forcefully, very quickly. Hamner is not a physician. He has never claimed to be. But he spent 31 years preparing human remains and developed, in his words, a very particular education in how the body shows what happened to it. He says what he observed that night was inconsistent with the self-administration of prescription drugs. He raised the issue with Danny, quietly, as they worked. Danny told him not to say anything. The two men from the corridor had made it clear, apparently in a brief exchange before Hamner arrived, that the preparation was to be conducted swiftly and without complication. Danny said to me, "These people are not asking us. They are telling us." And I understood what that meant. I was 32 years old. I had a wife and a baby at home. I put my pen down and I finished the job. The second prep sheet Hamner completed contained none of his original observations. It was a clean, uneventful record. He signed it. It became part of the official file. He has not seen it since. For decades, Hamner tried to identify the two men who had been present that evening. He had no names. He had faces, one heavyset, late 40s, with a gray crew cut and a signet ring on his right hand. The other younger, lean, dark-haired, who chewed gum the entire time and never once made eye contact. I described them to Danny once, about a year after. He went quiet. He said, "Bobby, don't. Just don't." That was the last time we ever talked about it. Danny passed away in 2009. His widow, who spoke briefly with this publication before declining further comment, confirmed that her husband had mentioned something that happened with a famous person in his final months. She said he had described feeling complicit in something I didn't understand. The question of who those men were and who sent them is one Hamner has never been able to answer definitively. But in 2019, while going through a box of old photographs taken at an industry event in 1979, he found something that stopped him cold. It was a group photo, some Funeral Directors Association dinner, and there, in the back row, was the heavy-set man with the crew cut. Older, maybe 2 years older, but him. No question. Through the other people in the photograph, several of whom Hamner was able to contact, he eventually traced the man to a private security and logistics firm that had provided services to several major entertainment organizations in the 1970s. The firm dissolved in 1984. Its principal, a man from Nashville whose name appears in Tennessee state business records, died in 1991. Hamner does not believe Elvis faked his death. He wants that on record. I prepared that man's body. I know what I prepared. What he believes, carefully, with the qualifications of someone who has spent decades resisting the pull of conspiracy, is that the circumstances of Elvis's death were being managed that evening. Not covered up exactly, managed. There's a difference, he says. Cover up means you're hiding that something happened. What these people were doing was more like smoothing, making sure the narrative was tidy, making sure nobody asked the kind of questions that might complicate things for the people who needed it to be simple. Who needed it to be simple? Hamner shrugs, but it is not a dismissive shrug. It is the shrug of a man who has thought about this question for 47 years and arrived at answers he does not feel he can prove. There were lawsuits pending. There were contracts. There were people who had a great deal to gain from a clean story. I'm not saying more than that, because I don't know more than that. But I know what I saw. And what I saw was not a clean story. Robert Hamner was diagnosed with stage 2 prostate cancer in the spring of 2023. The prognosis is manageable. His oncologist is cautiously optimistic, but the diagnosis did what diagnoses do. It focused things. You start thinking about what you're going to leave behind. Not money, not stuff. I mean what you leave in the record. What you were a witness to, and whether you bore witness to it honestly. He had come close to speaking before. In 1995, a journalist researching a book on Elvis's final years contacted him through a former colleague. Hamner agreed to a preliminary conversation, then withdrew. I got scared. My kids were teenagers. I didn't know what kind of people were still paying attention. In 2014, a documentary filmmaker sent him a letter. He didn't respond. In 2020, during the long isolation of the pandemic, he wrote out the full account by hand, 12 pages on legal paper, and then burned them in his backyard fire pit. My wife watched me do it. She didn't say anything. She knew. She's known since 1978. Actually, I told her one night when I'd had too much to drink and couldn't hold it anymore. She told me to be careful. She's been telling me to be careful for 46 years. What changed was, in part, the death of several people who had been present at Graceland in the months surrounding Elvis's passing, people Hamner had considered, if not co-witnesses, then at least potential corroborators. As those names disappeared from the obituary pages, the weight of sole possession seemed to grow heavier. I'm not the only person who knows things about that night, but I might be the last one who was in that room. He pauses. The last one who's willing to say so, anyway. He reached out to this publication through a retired colleague. He asked for no payment. He asked for one thing. At his granddaughter's name, she is 11, and loves Elvis's music, not appear anywhere in the piece. We have honored that request. What Hamner hopes for is not investigation. He is realistic about the limits of pursuing truth across a nearly 5-decade gap. What he hopes for is simpler, that people understand the official story of August 16, 1977, is not the complete story. I'm not asking anyone to believe me, he says, as we prepare to leave. I'm asking them to consider that a 32-year-old kid, alone in a room with Elvis Presley, had no reason to lie. Then or now. Robert Hamner is not a conspiracy theorist. He is a retired embalmer from Germantown, Tennessee, who has been sitting on a first-hand account for 47 years and is now, finally, too tired to keep sitting. Whether his account changes anything about the official record is, at this point, unlikely. The people who might have answered his questions are gone. The documents that might have corroborated his observations were destroyed or sealed. The 2 men from the corridor remain unnamed, but history is not only what is officially documented, it is also what was witnessed. And Robert Hamner was a witness. Now, it's your turn. Do you believe Robert Hamner? What detail hit you hardest? The prep sheet that was torn away, the bruising pattern, or the men who were never supposed to be there? Drop your theory in the comments. This story deserves a real conversation.